the Buddha has pointed out that the Dhamma is beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end. Ādi-kalyānam, majjhe-kalyānam, pariyosāna-kalyānam in Pali. And one traditional threefold division which applies to the Dhamma is the higher training in virtue, the higher training of the mind, which is the training in samadhi, and the higher training in wisdom. So if you use it in that sense, then the beginning would be the training in virtue, the middle would be the training in samadhi, and the end would be the training in wisdom. We could also use another division where you would say the beginning is a training in generosity, in making good karma, the middle is a training in virtue, and the end is a training in bhavana, in meditation. But the point here is that even if you don't realize nibbana yet, even if you don't realize samadhi yet, the bliss and rapture of samadhi, you may not be able to experience it, and you may not be able to experience the total freedom from the destruction of defilements, like an arahant. But even if you just practice only the beginning, that is already beautiful. That's one outstanding quality of the Dhamma. It's not like you get the results only once you have done everything. For example, if you do a degree in university, and it's a 3-year degree, and you're doing 2 years, and then you stop, it's like basically having nothing. Either you finish the thing, then you got it, or if you have negotiations for a deal, and you're negotiating and you're very close, and then it all falls through, and then there's nothing. It's not like that with the Dhamma. Even if you practice only a little bit, you will already have certain benefits, because it's beautiful already in the beginning. Ajahn Chah used to say, if you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. And if you let go of everything, then you will have real perfect peace. That's the same idea. It also means, on the other hand, if you practice the beginning, you are really generous and you're very kind, you're keeping precepts, and then you may feel already tremendously happy, and the life becomes so much more fulfilling, enjoyable, your great benefits. Don't forget, it's also beautiful in the middle and in the end. So there's more to be had. So you have benefits already from the start, but don't forget then the real huge, the highest benefits will come once we go to the end. Okay, we have a different interpretation here suggested. One division of the threefold is a 3 times. Atita, Nagata, Paccuppanna. The past, the future, and the present. And surely you could apply that to the Dhamma. The Dhamma was beautiful in the past, the Dhamma will be beautiful in the future, and the Dhamma is beautiful here and now. And so when the Buddha was teaching the Dhamma 2,500 years ago and they were practicing it, it was beautiful. The Kalyanam is difficult to translate. It means beautiful, but not just like a sensual beauty or like a beautiful flower. It also means beautiful in a wholesome and noble way. Good is almost like a synonym for good. And as long as the Dhamma is still around, it will be beautiful in another 1,000 years. And when we are practicing it now, so I would agree that interpretation is also possible. Yeah. So we have the question in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the first discourse of the Buddha setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. It says in the end that Venerable Kondañña understood, and this is why he was given by the Buddha the name Aññā-Kondañña, Kondañña who has understood. And now the question is to what depth or to what level has he understood? And that can be answered a little bit earlier in the sutta. It says, Vita jang, vita malang, dhammachakung udapadi. While this discourse was being taught, there arose in the Venerable Aññā-Kondañña the unblemished, pure vision of Dhamma. Yankinchi samudaya dhammang sabantang nirodhanam manti. Whatever is of a nature to arise, that is also of a nature to cease. Whatever arises will pass away. That is the basic insight of impermanence and dependent origination of all sankharas. And that is a characteristic of the stream enterer. From that one can infer that Venerable Aññā-Kondañña, while listening, attained the level of stream entry. An Arahant would be described in different terms.
So he started to enter the first level of
the noble attainments, yes. Now, there are 4 different levels of noble attainments, irreversible stages of enlightenment, of realization of the Dhamma. Now, the first one known as Sotapatti or stream entry. And the second one, Sakadagami or once returner. This person will have sensual desire and aversion permanently reduced but not yet eliminated. And the result is that they will be reborn a maximum of one more time as a human. That doesn't mean that they may become an Arahant in this life if they practice diligently. But even if they're the most sloppy they can possibly be, considering their attainment, it will be only one more life. The third attainment is anagamita, non-returning, and that means that this person has eliminated the 5 lower fetters, and only the 5 higher remain, and they will be reborn only in the pure abodes, that is states of samadhi. They still have attachment to the rapture and bliss of samadhi. And the 4th stage is the Arahant who has completely eliminated all craving and attachment and will not be reborn anywhere. And Venerable Aññā-Kondañña, that was stream entry. You can also read that in the Vinaya, because in the Vinaya there's the whole story how the Buddha arrived, how they were first reluctant to respect him, but then they couldn't hold themselves back, and they did the services to a teacher, but they would still address the Buddha as friend rather than as Bhante, as Venerable Sir. And then the Buddha first had to convince them that he is truly awakened, so that they actually have faith. Because as long as they don't have that faith that he is truly awakened and the concomitant respect, the Buddha would be unlikely to succeed teaching them. That is quite beautifully described in the Vinaya. And you have got the setting for the Dhammacakka Sutta. In the Samyutta Nikaya, which is the version of the first discourse in the Sutta Pitaka, which is what most people know better if they're not monks or nuns, there's no context. It just starts off that the Buddha is addressing them. But in the Vinaya it's quite beautifully described. And it continues afterwards. And the Buddha gives special training to these 5 monks. And to the extent that he even devises a scheme that sometimes 3 of the monks would go arms round and then share with all of the 6 of them. 5 monks plus the Buddha. And at other times, only 2 monks would go arms round the remaining 2, and they would share with all the 6 of them. So the Buddha tried to reduce disturbance for them, and even the simple act of going into town and sauna there or to Varanasi for going on alms round may be distractive. So he had some of them on retreat. So the first Rains retreat, the Buddha kind of introduced a retreat system. I'm often, I'm trying not to feel jealous, but to develop mudita, because imagine that kind of situation. You're sharing the Buddha with only 5 people, and he's giving you a personal instruction. He's training you every day. Of course, it's also very challenging. Obviously, you would really, really try your very best to not think the wrong things and not to have the wrong perceptions. And it's described how that was quite successful, and how the others would also attain stream entry. And then at some stage in that rainy season retreat, I could imagine it was probably the first full moon, the Buddha was teaching the Anatta-lakkhana Sutta, the sutta on the characteristic of not self. And all these 5 monks who were sekas attained full awakening. Nibbana, became arahants while listening to that discourse. There's also the term in Pali, seka, that means one in training. And that's a technical term which refers to the 3 lower noble attainments. So all those who are stream enterers, once returners, and non-returners, who are already noble individuals, already have attained one stage of enlightenment at least. They had the vision of Dhamma arising, they have seen Nibbana, but they haven't been able to fully realize that. And the Buddha uses that term seka, in training for all 3 of them. And sometimes it's not made explicit by the Buddha on what exact level they are. But here it seems to be very clear that Venerable Aññā-Kondañña had the vision of Dhamma arising, so he became a stream enterer while listening to the Dhammacakka Sutta. This is clearly not the highest possible number of attainments, and the reason here for that is most likely that our Buddha appeared in a time when the human lifespan is very short, only 100 years. And when the human lifespan is only 100 years, it means that the level of corruption and defilements is very, very high. And if we look at other Buddhas, the Buddha actually talks about, the Buddha Vipassi is, I think, is it 80,000 or 100,000 years? Oh, I'm not 100% sure now. I think 80,000 or maybe 100,000 years, a human lifespan, average human lifespan. And then Buddha Sikhi was 70,000, Buddha Vesabhu was 60,000 years lifespan for humans. And then Buddha Kakusandho, Konagamano, and Kasapo, these 3 Buddhas were 40,000, 30,000, and 20,000 years. So the next shortest lifespan, Buddha Kassapa, would still be 20,000 years. So that is more than 2 orders of magnitude higher than our lifespan, and more than 100 times longer than our lifespan. And Buddha Vipassi is almost 3 orders of magnitude. So if you look at the Aganya Sutta and Chakravarti Siyanada Sutta, where the Buddha describes how human beings decline and have more and more defilements, and as a result their lifespan becomes shorter. 100 years is already pretty bad. In fact, one gets the impression, if you don't have the full information, but the Buddha talked about 6 other Buddhas previously, and all had a much higher lifespan. So it's maybe not statistically sufficient to make definite statements, but it appears that usually Buddhas arise when the human world is much better. And when the lifespan is up to 100,000 years as humans, they're probably almost like devas. They have hardly any sickness other than having to eat and drink and to urinate and defecate. That is the sicknesses they are described as having at 100,000 years lifespan. and there are very little defilements, and the people would normally never lie, they would never steal and things like that, and which is actually the reason for their long lifespan. So I think our Buddha is almost a one-off. There's many things unusual. There's also a Buddha-Kappa. A Buddha-Kappa means a fortunate eon, because this is already the fourth Buddha in one eon, in one world system. I'm not 100% sure what is one world system. I tend to think it's probably one solar system. But it's obviously difficult to transfer these Pali terms to modern scientific terms. But one solar system would make sense. And sometimes you don't have any Buddha arising for several eons, for periods, basically trillions of years. So it's very exceptional for a Buddha to arise, and in the same eon to have four Buddhas is very unusual. But then it's also unusual that the lifespan is so short. We also don't have any report that what our Buddha had to go through, that they, for example, there were attempts on murdering him. And one of those, when Devadatta was hurling the rock down the hill at the Buddha, the rock didn't hit him because the Buddha can't be killed. As one of the qualities of a Tathagata, is actually impossible to maliciously kill them. But it's already extremely unusual that the rock was diverted by another rock and split. But one splinter hit the Buddha's foot and caused him to bleed and to have pain, which is already an anantarika karma. One of the worst kinds of karma, which means a person doing that will definitely go to hell in their next lifespan, next rebirth. And in the case of a Buddha, it's enough to maliciously injure him to the extent that his blood is shed. And most likely with the long-lived Buddhas, very few human beings would be killing and doing things like that anyhow. So would usually not happen to a Buddha. Or that the Sangha was split. The Devadatta succeeded in getting 500 monks with a formal split of the Sangha. And although the Buddha could, and Venerable Sai Buddha, Venerable Ma Moggallana, could convince the monks and they could heal that schism. But again, it's extremely bad karma for Devadatta and anyone knowingly, intentionally participating. And I don't think the other Buddhas had that. And when you read about Buddha Vipassi, when he started teaching, there would be, I think, 100,000 of attainments, and many becoming Arahant. I think this seems to be almost like an absolutely, the Buddha does his first discourse, and in the human world there's only one person who attains on the lowest level of stream entry. I think that is unusual, because our Buddha has been born in a time when corruption among humans is very high. So with the longer-lived Buddhas, they usually have much higher attainments, and you have also many more listening to the first discourse in the human world. They say that many devas would listen and also attain, but amongst humans, this is unusual.
Thank you very much. It's clear in my head now, because I thought he attended arahantship, and I tried to understand the language,
Mm-hmm.
see the absolute of non-self in there. So it's clear now. Thank you.
Now, the way it is described regarding non-self, the stream enterer abandons what is called Sakkaya Ditthi, the first of the 10 Sangyojana. So that is entity view, the first of the 10 fetters that tie us into samsara, that cause us not to be endlessly reborn. And entity view, that is on the level of view. So it's an understanding of not self on the level of view, but they can still have thoughts and perceptions of I, me, and mine. They can't really hold on to a doctrine of self. And they would understand, if you ask the stream enter, they would clearly see that the body is not self. And they would clearly see that feelings and so on, that this is not safe. But they can still have these personality-tinged perceptions and thoughts of I, me and mine. This is at least how it's described. It's difficult to understand that unless someone has these experiences. So asmimana, the conceit of I am, that is higher sangyojana, and that is only abandoned by the arahant. So even the non-returner, the third stage, they still have very subtle ideas, perceptions of I and me. In the case of the anagami, only refer, not for the body anymore, for an anagami, non-returner, but still for, in particular, the experiences in meditation, both the rapture and bliss and peace of samadhi, and also possibly psychic powers they have based on samadhi, and also the joy and fascination and enthusiasm in one's insight practice. They can still identify with that to some extent. Usually when you see this description that the pure, unadulterated vision of Dhamma arises in a person, the Dhammacakka, the Dhammacakku, not Dhamma, the Dhammacakku, the eye of Dhamma, the vision of Dhamma. That usually refers to a stream enterer. Yankintri samudaya dhammang sabantang nirodha dhammanti. Whatever is of a nature to arise, that is of a nature to cease. It was really fascinating to read that in the Vinaya, how the Buddha trained them. Just imagine that. You have the Buddha, he would be watching their mind, I'm very sure, and then he would give exactly, and he would probably check their past lives. So giving them exactly the meditation objects that's the best for them. And then telling them what meditation object to use now, how to deal with that difficulty. So not surprising that they could all attain. When he was also checking them, he was teaching the Anatta-lakkhana, the sutta on not safe, only after he could see that they're all ready. Because again, this is a deep Dhamma, and if a person is not yet ready, they will not attain while listening to that. So here's some speculation about how the first 5 disciples of the Buddha practiced. I can't remember that the Buddha has said they had practiced under Ādi-kalyānam. That was the Bodhisattva who did that. They certainly supported the Buddha when he was doing the ascetic practices. That is mentioned. I'm not sure, I cannot remember them being mentioned when the Buddha practiced under the first 2 teachers. If they were not there, the question arises, what were they doing at that time? I can't answer that. But it's certainly stated by the Buddha that they were attending on him when he was doing the ascetic practices. And you have to keep in mind, they left the Buddha when he started eating more substantial food again. So they clearly had no wrong view. So I'm not so sure about your speculation that they practiced the 5 spiritual faculties very diligently. I doubt it. Because they were stuck in the views prevalent at that time, the particular extreme asceticism. And they didn't even believe the Buddha that it's the right decision and not to completely emaciate himself and basically kill himself. In fact, they were disgusted and left him. So I imagine after this first sutta, and when they now had full faith in him, the Buddha would encourage them to abandon the extreme asceticism. In fact, that is the beginning of that whole sutta. He points out that extreme asceticism that's leading to self-harm is also ignoble. Dukkho anariyo anatta sangito. It's painful, it is ignoble, and it's not leading to the goal. But that would be new for them. And one major thing the Buddha was probably teaching them is samadhi. Because once they let go of this extreme asceticism, they would be in a position to practice samadhi properly. And that may have taken some time. It was possibly the majority of the time. And that was probably the reason that we can, this is all speculative, so I'm not sure how useful it is to go into that. But as there were such strong believers in extreme asceticism, the most likely they didn't have good samadhi. Because if you wear out the body so heavily, it's difficult to get good samadhi, and they didn't have the teaching about that on top of it. So it probably would take them some time to develop samadhi, to develop jhana. And that's probably the reason that the Buddha devised this scheme that they would alternate going arms round, not the Buddha, but the five, and just sharing, because to develop samadhi and solitude is just very helpful. And to really speed up their progress, and he probably wanted to prevent them being distracted by whatever you may experience at arms round. That to me indicates samadhi was an important part of that. But exactly how they practice and so on, we don't have that described by the Buddha, so it's very speculative. What we can say for sure, they obviously had outstanding parami. To be the person who the Buddha teaches first. Now the Buddha is thinking, investigating, who should I teach first now? And then he picks you. You've got to have some very outstanding parami to be one of these five. Or even being present and attending on the bodhisattva while he's practicing. This is obviously very exceptional people. But we can also see that they were clearly not the ones with the highest paramis. They were, for example, not chief disciples. The chief disciples would exceed, in terms of their spiritual faculties, would exceed all five of them by a lot. And similar, only, I think so, from memory, only Ven Aññā-Kondañña is mentioned as a mahasāvaka, as the most senior disciple, most senior monk disciple of the Buddha. He has got that ranking as a great disciple. But I'm not sure, I don't think any of the other four is actually even a mahasāvaka. Yeah, they're traditionally 80, but it's not such a round number because some have multiple categories. Venerable Ananda alone, I think 4 or 5 categories. So the figure is not as round as it's traditionally described. So they were special, but they were not even the most outstanding. And I think the Buddha picked them rather than Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Moggallana, because he also had some gratitude to them because they attended on him for several years. And it was probably quite tough. When the Bodhisattva was doing these extreme ascetic practices, they may not have done it on the same level, but I imagine that they also practiced very tough. And then constantly looking after the Bodhisattva, I imagine a lot was coming from gratitude there. That he chose them as the first ones. Yes?
Any special reason?
Yes, yeah, okay.
Any special reason why the Buddhas have been born in that part of India, northern part of India?
Is there any special reason the Buddha has been born in the northern part of India? The Buddha is always born in what is known as a majjhe-Padesa, the middle country. And the northern India at that time was the middle country. And the majjhe-Padesa refers to the location where the external conditions are suitable for Buddha to arise, and where other beings with parami are born, other beings with high spiritual faculties are in that area. Interestingly, the other Buddhas we know about in this eon were also born in India. The descriptions we have, for example, all of them are said to have attained at the same spot in Bodh Gaya. However, I don't think that means that India is always a middle country in that sense that it's the most spiritually advanced area. I don't think it would apply now. But at the time when the Buddha comes, he will be in a place reborn which at that time is spiritually most developed. Because else the Buddha couldn't do it successfully. If people have no belief in karma, it's also really important that there's a culture where you are begging for alms as a spiritual practitioner. If that would be lacking, it would be very difficult for Buddha to establish this asana. I think that is all part of the Buddha Parami, that he will come at a time when these basic conditions are there, that people have some belief, or many people at least have some belief already in karma and rebirth, and that they respect ascetic spiritual practitioners who have gone forth, that there's a culture of leaving the household life. And quite frankly, I cannot imagine a Buddha arising at a time when you have mobile phones, cars and motorways. I just can't imagine the Buddha walking next to a motorway with a sangha of 1,000 people, and then people coming and doing their selfies in front of a Buddha and so on. I think it's already over. If you live in that kind of time, there will be no Buddha.
That just leads to my question.
My personal opinion.
You just came from a big trip, you're focusing more.
Okay, 2 questions. First one, I just came from a big trip. Could I share about that? Well, it's not exactly just, it's more than a month now. And I've shared a lot of that, and I feel some compassion. Here, Peter, for example, I think he literally sat through 6 sessions where I repeatedly shared events of my trip, and some of that was published on podcast and YouTube. And we already a little bit, so maybe I wouldn't want to go too deeply into that. But the highlight was the 3 full days I had in Bodh Gaya. If you ask about it, this is one thing I can absolutely 100% recommend. Go to Bodh Gaya. I was there in the rainy season, which is not ideal, stinking hot, super humid. It can be slippery and difficult with the heat and so on, but it's also not so crowded, which is great. And if you get a hotel with an aircon close to the place, and any time go. It's just so mind-blowing, the energy. As we just said, all 3 Buddhas in this eon, all 4 Buddhas in this eon so far, the 3 previous and our Buddha, and sitting inside that temple, for me it's strongest inside. It's worth, even if you had to fly first class as the only option, it would still be worth it. Even if you had to walk there, even if you had to swim across from Australia to India, it would still be worth it. It's so good, yeah. It was also nice seeing the monastery in India as coming together. I mean, the monastery in our tradition in India. And it was great. Father is doing fine. I was happy to see that. Got to speak to Ajahn Dhammasiha. He will be visiting the senior monk at Motodaya Monastery, Germany. He will be here for our New Year events. Yeah, maybe a quick one on that one. Out of compassion to Peter and others who had to... I'm not sure whether you're that generation. When I was young, people would sometimes do these slideshows. That was before mobile phones, but they had cameras and they would do a slideshow from their holidays. And then you had to endure through them boasting through a whole slideshow. Here's me in front of the Eiffel Tower, here's me at Trafalgar Square, here's me at Times Square, and you're just sitting there. So I don't want to strain people too much. Can you repeat the second question?
The second question is, thought more than others?
Okay, so from my observations while traveling in the general state of humanity, could I recommend humanity what kind of Dhamma they should practice more? Now, the whole thing is highly recommendable, but if they can maybe start with the first precept, that is. Although I didn't encounter killing actually directly, but if you look at the news, and obviously I'm aware that you will not get the majority of humanity to practice the Dhamma to the full extent, but Ādi-kalyānam, the Dhamma is beautiful in the beginning. And so I would recommend humanity to practice at least some of the beginning stages. For example, even just the first precept, and to practice kindness and generosity, to open the heart to the qualities of compassion and goodwill to other beings. I mean, just with the first precepts, you wouldn't have any Ukraine war, you wouldn't have the genocide in Gaza still ongoing after, what is it now, 2.5 years or something? Live genocide on camera. And maybe also to be less callous, and sometimes maybe to do something if one can do something. Not to try to stop killing by killing oneself, but sometimes it can be good to have a little bit of courage to speak up and not just ignore it. But as we talk, coming back to the beginning of our Q&A, Ādi-kalyānam, I think it would be very naive to think we can get the whole world to practice the pariyosāna-kalyānam, the completion, beautiful in its utmost completion and attaining arahantship. But hopefully we can encourage more people to develop the basic qualities of kindness and compassion, starting with some empathy. Just imagine how would I feel if I had to endure that. And then asking, how can I help other beings? How can I do something for other beings?
How do we invite other people to the principles? Everybody's moving that way and you're trying to practice.
Yeah, how do we get them doing that? I mean, I try my best. Here's a YouTube. Here's a recording for the podcast. We have got quite a good crowd. Yes, yeah. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's difficult to get through to the youngsters. On the statistics, it doesn't look good for under 35. But I'm also a bit old. If you're in your 20s, you don't want to look at the grandfathers teaching you the Dhamma. You want to have the young, attractive faces. But now how many young, attractive faces are there teaching the Dhamma? The young, attractive ones often teach other things. So this is obviously not easy. The basis should always be that we practice ourselves. If you really take up the practice, and again, Ādi-kalyānam, if you just start being more kind and compassionate and generous as a very beginning, you will usually have some impact on some people at least. If we aim at the whole humanity, even the Buddha couldn't get through to whole humanity. This is why they arise in the middle country. If they had arisen what was Germany or Australia 2,500 years ago, they wouldn't work. Amongst the Germanic tribes or the Aboriginal people, I don't think the Buddha could have effectively taught. But so even the Buddha couldn't reach all of humanity. So who are we? But usually you can't practice kindness and generosity without impacting other people. And teaching by example is usually the way to go anyhow.